we're moving into our first talk of the day, and I'm very excited about this one. We have a very special guest joining us today. It is my honor to introduce Mr. Dyab Abou Jahjah, the founder and general director of the Hind Rajab Foundation. Dyab is an author, activist, and thought leader whose work has been pivotal in advocating for justice across Europe and the Arab world. Today, we'll share insight into the Foundation's transformative work, the challenges it faces, and how the global struggle for Palestinian liberation, is deeply connected to a broader movement for justice and equity. Please give a warm welcome to Dyab.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. Well, I prepared some. Okay. The Mossad's starting to work. I prepared some notes here, and of course, this is a habit of mine to structure my ideas because I go all over the place when I speak. But I think also, another habit of mine is to totally ignore this. So, yeah, I mean, it is difficult to know where to start when we want to talk about the juncture of justice, of accountability, of technology. These things seem counterintuitive and contradictory, right? I mean, technology has always been considered as the base of our world. And if we look at this world, we are not really struck by abundance of justice in the world, right? So if technology is the base of the world, like most people on the left believe, including myself, well, then technology is not really producing a lot of justice in the world, right? So it's counterintuitive for me. However, if I want to start somewhere to ground my activism and my commitment, maybe I should start where I was born and raised. And I'll take you back to 1976. I wasn't born in 1976. I was born in 1971. But in 1976, I was a 5-year-old young kid from South Lebanon, from a village called Hanin. And in Hanin, Palestine is very close. South Lebanon is actually an extension of Palestine. Forget Sykes-Picot and whatever you want. South Lebanon is North Galilee. Okay. So we are Galileans, like we and the people in Galilee, we have exactly the same culture. We're the same region. Actually, we and Palestinians from Galilee are closer to each other than Palestinians from Galilee are, for example, Palestinians from Gaza or from the West Bank. Okay, West Bank is the border of Galilee a bit. So, but of course, Sykes-Picot happened and we became Lebanese and the Palestinians became Palestinians and the Syrians, Syrians, and so on. But the reality, the demographic reality, the sociological reality continued to exist. And when Palestine was colonized and ethnically cleansed in 1948, and of course the process was earlier, Hanin could not but experience this as an onslaught on its own identity and its own existence, right? And soon after, this became a reality. Soon after, the Israelis tried to take parts of southern Lebanon. And they started building networks of collaboration in villages in the south and demanded that from my village. And not to tell the whole story, I can speak hours about that. The village refused. I mean, the people in the village refused. They were quite politicized and resisted. And they were surrounded. We were surrounded. I was 5-year-old. I wasn't very aware, but I still have flashbacks to that time. And the village was attacked, invaded by what became later the South Lebanese Army, which is a proxy army of the Israelis, something similar to Abu Shabaab groups or whatever you see today in Gaza, really similar dynamics, thugs armed by Israel and used by Israel as a proxy to do their dirty work for them. So my village was invaded by these people, but the Israeli tanks were there and the helicopters were there and they were lighting for them and the Israeli bulldozer were opening the way. A bit like Sabra and Shatila, Go in, kick them out, kill whoever you can kill, but we will act as if we have not done it, right? I remember that very well, and I will spare you the details because I remember blood and I remember screams and I remember them shooting between our legs, and we were children, and all the men were in the valleys, were in the hills trying to resist, and they retreated militarily eventually, and they thought, okay, the civilians are safe in the village, and we were not safe. But I will spare you the gore and the terrible details. Something that remained with me at that time was, where's the justice? You know, not that when I was 5. When I was 5, I was just afraid and running with my mother while she was holding my other brother who was 6 months at the time. But like when I started becoming aware of the world, I said, how could this happen to us? That's something that always remained for me. How could this happen to us? And I will jump in the time to 1982. I think most of you know that in 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon and reached Beirut, right? And also, I remember a lot of details. I remember a building next to our building totally brought down. I was living in a city called Sidon because we were expelled from our village. Our village was totally destroyed. We were ethnically cleansed, and our village was occupied, right? So in 1982, the Israelis reached Beirut, and to spare you a lot of the details, it ended up with massacre again. Same style, sending their thugs in, collaborators, proxy forces, surrounding the camps of Sabra and Shatila. And I'm talking about Sabra and Shatila because I'm talking about the massacre act, because you could also talk about all the buildings that they brought down, all the bombardment they've done, and all the people they have killed on the roads in their own homes. But I would just want to talk about a fraction of the massacres they committed, the Sabra and Shatila massacre, right? So they applied the same model. And at that time I was 11, and I was a bit more aware. I grew up in a quite politicized home, and my father and his comrades were always talking about what's happening, and I was listening all the time. And I was listening to the pain, I was listening to the hopelessness, to the despair. And I remember one guy saying to my father, how are we human beings? Do we have anything to claim humanity? How can they do this to us and get away with it? And that remained in my mind as well. Also, again, I will go forward, not to bore you with a lot of details about the Lebanese Civil War, but the Lebanese Civil War ended in 1991. And I was part of a generation that was engaged with that civil war quite early. I remember the first time I held a rifle, I was 13 years old. And I had dreams. And you might think, how shocking, that child was abused. Well, to start with, my parents were shocked as maybe some of you are. They did not want that. I did that against their will. My father and my mother always, even though they were activists themselves, but you know, the parental instinct, they always tried to shield me from that, right? But I couldn't. But I was part of a generation that had ideals in Lebanon. I was part of a leftist organization in the country, and we dreamt of at that time, of a socialist Lebanon, that is supporting the Palestinian resistance. That was our ideal, right? Not like the Israelis would tell you about my ideals, but okay, well, let's leave that aside. We don't care what they say. So I was disappointed in 1991, and I was politically depressed, basically, I would say. And I left the country, came to Belgium, and I thought I will just travel around Europe a couple of years and then go back to Lebanon. That was my initial idea. And eventually these years kept dragging on. You start building a life. You meet people, you fall in love, you find a job, you start studying at university, and then these 2 years become 5 years, and the 5 years become 10 years. And at a certain moment, I did not want to do politics in Belgium. I did not want to do activism. I was actually disgusted from all that. I did not lose my ideals, but I lost the will to fight for it. After the Lebanese Civil War ended with a shameless, disgusting deal that betrayed the blood of so many young people who fought believing that a new Lebanon is possible. I was disgusted by that. But in Belgium, I was actually politicized again when I joined the trade union here. And I got the responsibility in a trade union to defend the rights of immigrant workers. I had a very nice job at 28. I was director of a department of a big trade union, the Socialist Trade Union of Belgium. For Belgians in the room, it's called FGTB in French, ABVV in Dutch. I was part of the Dutch version of the trade union. And I said, okay, you know what? We can do stuff. We can do something. And I was socialized by the trade union into the issues of the racial discrimination in this country. And I remember a discussion early on, and I was spared the debate on racism. I can speak hours about that. But that was, for me, how I was repoliticized in Belgium, through the anti-racist struggle. But I remember a conversation with my boss, who was like a big, they call them secretaries, but they're anything but, people who are serving others. They are really the ones who have the power in the trade union. And that, general secretary was telling me, look, we want to organize something to commemorate the Nakba or the Palestinian, he did not use the Nakba. I said the Palestinian plight, we want to organize something, and we're thinking of going big this time. We're thinking of inviting Shimon Peretz. And of course, he heard what I think of that. And I will spare you the look on his face when I was telling him, are you crazy? It's like organizing something to commemorate the Holocaust and then inviting a neo-Nazi or somebody who was in the SS. That's what you're doing. No, but Shimon Peres is the good guy, right? He's left and so this is where I got a shock. And it was one of the reasons why I left the trade union. There were other reasons. One of them, very important one, is actually they did not want to work for immigrant rights. They just want to pretend that they are, right? Let's put that aside. So I left the trade union, and together with a bunch of friends, including Karim Hassoun, who's sitting right there, we started something called the Arab European League. We thought, look, we will organize ourselves. We don't need to be in organizations. We will organize ourselves. We will start things ourselves. And we wanted to work on the racism issue at the time, which was much more extreme than what you have today in Belgium. I admit that Belgium evolved a lot, but we're talking 1999, 2000. It was a different world back then. Telling people that racism exists back then was a shocking radical position, right? Including people on the left, okay? But anyway, we were with a discourse that today would be considered by the movement, by the broader justice movement, as soft and liberal. With such a discourse, we were considered extremists back then in Belgium. I was considered like a radical extremist. I was Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah at the same time. So yeah, eventually that experience brought me to Sabra and Shatila case again. The Sabra and Shatila case that was filed in 2000 in Belgium, I had a part in that. I will not claim that I filed the case, but I was part of it. And I was hoping for justice. And I believe that justice will happen. What happened is that Belgium changed its law to get Sharon out of the problems that he had. And I did not believe that could happen. So now I will abuse my time with 4 minutes to tell you how somebody with such an experience that is frustrating when talking about justice and accountability could have in his mind the idea of starting an organization for legal action and for justice and accountability. And I'm telling you, when the genocide started in Gaza, it was counterintuitive to do legal cases. It was counterintuitive to make appeals to international law or even to national law. But then, out of desperation, we did not know what to do, basically. So it's not like we had a master plan and, we're going to do this and going to do that. So what can you do? Just let's expose again, even though this world has been exposed, across centuries for the injustice as its base, right? But let's expose again. What could you do, right? And we started filing cases, but this time we said we will file cases against dual national soldiers who were posting and boasting with their crimes in Gaza. And we will file cases against rank and file, not just against Netanyahu and the leaders. And I had till 9:50 according to the schedule, so I will go to 9:55. You can pull me off the stage, no problem. But I'm just declaring my crime to you before committing it, since that's the fashion nowadays. So, yeah. So, I remember the first case that we filed in the Netherlands. We did not even believe that anything will happen, and indeed, nothing happened. We basically took a post from an Instagram account of an Israeli soldier. He was standing on the rubble of a house in Gaza saying, "We will bolt out the memory of Amalek from under the skies," and proud of it, and he was Dutch. So I said, okay, let's take that picture, screenshot it, give it to a lawyer, he will write something very fast, and we will send it. So we've done that, nothing happened, of course. Then we've done another one like that, 3, 4, 5, we've done 7 cases like that. The police did nothing. But what happened is that the Israelis reacted hard. They said, wait a minute, why are they angry? Nothing is happening. Why are they angry? And then all of a sudden, one day I woke up on a Sunday, and I had the the doorbell ringing, and Interpol was in front of my house. Belgian, well, yeah, Europol indeed, yeah. Well, both. And the guy was ashamed to be there, saying, "I'm sorry, Mr. Abou Jahjah, that has to bother you on a Sunday morning, but I'm sent by the Dutch government and we have to come and execute this order. You have to delete these tweets where you are exposing the names of the Israeli soldiers. You have to delete them." And I said, "And what if I don't? Do you have to arrest me?" And he said, no, we just have to tell you that from the Dutch government. And I said, of course, yeah, you can tell the Dutch government I'm not deleting anything, right? And they went. So then I understood that we have touched a nerve. I mean, okay, the Dutch government, probably called by another government and so on. So he's coming to pull me from the stage. Yeah, I really will stop at 9:55. Don't worry. I'm watching it. So we said, okay, look, they don't like it. Let's keep doing it, right? They're threatening us, they're pushing back, let's keep doing it. And maybe there's something about this. And okay, long story, of course. But at a certain moment, we realized, look, and the police will not do anything, because normally as a citizen, the only thing you need to do if you see a crime is to report it, right? You do not need to investigate. You do not need to do the work of law enforcement for them, right? That's their job. You just have to tell them, look, I saw this happening. Can you look at it, right? But then we understood, oh no, they're not going to do that. So you know what? We need to investigate. We need to actually become the police ourselves. We need actually to nationalize law enforcement, Well, nationalize, we're not a state, popularize maybe, law enforcement, And then we started building what's necessary. And we were few activists, but we built a research team, we built a forensic team. And when I'm saying team, I'm talking about 2, 3 volunteers, right, every time. And we had lawyers we had. And really 2 minutes now. We started giving cases to the law enforcement that they could not ignore. And then something happened in Cyprus, not very famous. People know us from cases in Brazil, from Tomorrowland, where soldiers were arrested. But the first thing happened in Cyprus, where a soldier, the Lievman case we call it, landed in Cyprus with his girlfriend, genocidal soldier, terrible profile. And he was vacationing there, and we filed the case against him in Cyprus. We communicated about it, because our lawyers told us if you don't communicate about it, nothing will happen, right? And then the Israelis smuggled him out of Cyprus. And we were like, what? They smuggled him out? Why? So they are afraid. So that thing called law is maybe dormant, handicapped, hijacked by power, but it does exist somewhere, right? And then we're starting upping our game. And when that happened, the Israeli media went berserk. And then they were talking that there was a commission founded to disrupt our work. And then they were talking that there was a budget of 40 million euro that was given to that commission. And we said, okay, let's do more and more on this. But what also happened, that many of you volunteered with the HRF at that moment. And that group of small, couple of volunteers here, couple of volunteers there, had a surge in numbers of people that could up our capabilities to a level that really can go above some law enforcement agencies. And this is not a metaphor. Now we know that for war crime units, and this is my last minute, for war crime units, law enforcement in a country like Spain has only 6 people. Law enforcement in a country like the Netherlands is like the privileged one, have 25 people, and that's a big unit. We have thousands of volunteers tracking, making forensic analysis, geolocating, and building cases across the world and filing these cases. So I'm not saying we have justice. I'm not saying we have what the victims deserve, but I'm saying there's fear. The Israeli army is starting hiding faces. They're starting taking pictures like that when they are. I'm not kidding. That's how they take pictures. So they're afraid of something. And I'm not saying only what we're doing, because many other people are also litigating. And I'm saying when there's fear, there's a begin of accountability. Accountability is not justice, but it's a crack in the wall of impunity, and every wall collapses with the first crack, right? We have to dig on that crack and make it bigger and bigger and keep going relentless. And then maybe one day we reach justice, which is the destination we want to reach. Thank you for your patience.